For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. Iman Rappetti discusses her book titled Becoming Iman. The book begins with you giving birth in the Islam state of Iran. How did you find yourself giving birth there?
I got pregnant. It was kind of like at the beginning of our journey into Islam and into a whole new world that we didn't know too much about. We were learning and very excited about. And so we traveled to Qom, which is a town just outside Tehran, which is the capital of Iran. And that's where you'll find a community that is almost like the Vatican. It's a religious student community of students from all over the world. And I was pregnant, and of course I had to have my child there.
Your life is fascinating from the perspective of being essentially mixed race. Your mother was colored, but your father was Tamil Indian. You were brought up as Christian and you converted to Islam. How do you think these multiple identities have shaped who you are?
Aren't we all made up of a little bit of schizophrenic identities? You know, you're part of this and you're part of that. And that's really the challenge, I think, or was the challenge for me growing up, is growing up in the slipstream of two very different worlds, so-called, you know, whole colored community, Indian Telugu community that my father's family was from. I think there are opportunities to delve into the depth of yourself. And when you're faced with questions of belonging or not belonging so early in your life, it allows you to think more deeply and more introspectively about yourself. And I think it's an opportunity for strength rather than for weakness.
And I remember you were always worried about your hair not being straight enough.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So fitting in is such, and when you're a kid, all you think about is how you fit in. You're not seized with the deeper political questions. It's only when you grow up that you realize, well, these were deeply political questions. Who I am, what is the definition of beauty? Do I fit into an acceptable template of beauty? And if I don't, why not? And as I write in the book, apartheid did a really good job of making what was beautiful ugly. You know, I've got these Durban hips, you know, these full hips and you know, a bum, which when I was growing up weren't acceptable standards and norms of beauty. And I had to grapple a lot with that as a child. Until the point where you become older and you learn to identify and define beauty for yourself.
What's your advice to youngsters who are mixed race, who are in multicultural identities, and who are struggling to find a sense of belonging?
Sunny, it's a combination of two things. It's truth and sensibility or sensitivity, I would say. Parents who might be raising their children in the middle of two different worlds or asking them to have full citizenship of both those worlds have to have conversations about what it means for how a child perceives themselves, to be open to the questions of identity. Where is my world? Where is my place? Is there, you know, a perfect marriage between these two worlds that I can define for myself? Or do I choose either of the singulars? I think if our parents are honest about the kind of chaos that it can create for a child, the kind of demands, the pushes and the pulling that it creates for a child, they'll be in an infinitely better place. It is a deeply personal journey. It's something that you can only identify and define for yourself. But they have to allow a space for that conversation to happen. And also to be able to hear the pain of not belonging.
What do you think of the role of identity politics in our country?
We sometimes, and this goes to a lot of what I discuss in my book, about the cleaving to or the desire for creating a label out of where we are. If you excavate deeper and under that label, if you lift it up a little bit, you will see that it cannot be an accurate definition of any one thing. The way we live and the way we interact with our society, the way we interact or how our history influences us are deeply textured and complex things. Identity politics is a broad sphere, I think, that maybe tries to create one house for everything to live uncomfortably under or in or within. And it's not always possible to do that. We live in a country where our history is so fraught. It is built on a history of oppression, on a history of separation and of othering. Can we come to a place of homogeneity? Can we come to a place of common identity? I think that's still an elusive thing, and I don't even think it's something that should be demanded of us, because of how we interact with the world. I mean, so many kids that grew up in exile have a completely different way of living and what defines them. And so I think it's great that we're having a discussion. And we look to Biko for our refuge, or we look to the Black Consciousness movement for our refuge. It is a work and a definition that's in progress.
Your father's family didn't get along with your mom because of her racial background. You even tell a shocking story of family conflicts at your father's funeral. Can you please reflect on the nature of these family conflicts?
When you're a child, it's very hard when you're trying to love people that you should love, like your grandparents and your aunties and your uncles, in a context where the people that you love the most, your parents, are at war with them. So it was very, very difficult when we were growing up and you'd kind of hear comments made about your mother. And it's so strange. I was talking to my brother about the book now that it's been published, and some of my cousins reading it now, and the scope for offense that there is, because they might feel, well, are you talking about my mom or my dad in all of this? There was a lot of pain and a lot of separation that was born out of the fact that my mother wasn't Indian in Durban. The next generation, which is us, the cousins, have found a way to reach out to each other and to create that sense of family that wasn't there. But it was difficult for my mother to fit in. And as people have been reading the book, for people who have a similar background to me are saying, yes, that was my mom's experience as well.
Tell us how your father's death affected you and how a Pavarotti song still triggers his memory.
So the morning that my father left our home forever, we were packing up, and there was a lot of concern. And we didn't ever think that he would never make it back home alive, to sit in his chair and for us to talk and to have meals and conversations at our home. And as we were leaving, there was a song that was playing on the radio, because I was the last one locking up and putting everything off, and I was going to put my radio off. And I heard this song play on the radio. It was Pavarotti's Caruso. I didn't understand the Italian. I didn't understand what it meant, but it just touched me in such a deep way. And I remembered just the tone and the cadence of the music. And when I was much older, the song, I overheard the song again, and I did my best to try and find out, well, who was singing it and what is the name of that song. And I found out there was Pavarotti and Caruso. And it's a song that also talks about regret, a song about goodbyes, a song about lost opportunities. And when I understood the meaning later on in life, it became a song that forever connects me to the memory of the day that my father left forever.
Your book is raw in its honesty in discussing the intimacy in love and relationship. What was it like writing a book that is so intensely personal?
Sunny, in my daily work, and in fact in my work as a journalist, we demand supreme honesty from the people that we're talking to on the other side of the microphone. And in my radio show, which is deeply personal and very interactive with my listeners, I thought that it would be the just thing to do. Obviously, I don't expose everything about myself, and I'm sure that you've probably come away with questions yourself about this or that I raised in the book. But I wanted to be, for the subjects that I did touch on, as honest as I possibly could. And it wasn't always easy to write about pain, about loss, or your bodily insecurities, or interactions that I've had with people. But I felt that in the way that I shared them was an encouragement to people who might have found themselves in similar situations. Maybe they arrived there differently, but the results of feeling insecure, that they could take solace in it, they could laugh about it, and they could capture some of that in redefining how they interact with their sense of loss in their lives.
The book also addresses the sad reality of women abuse. Tell us what it was like having to see your father abusing your mother.
I mean, you've got to feel for children who love both their parents, and yet one of their parents is a perpetrator of violence. It is an incredibly difficult relationship to manage because, as I write in the book, my father would take me on walks, and it would be so fun because I'm hopefully going to get a chocolate or a packet of chips in the middle of the week, which is an unheard of thing because money is so tight. And then when you go home, the innocent questions that he was asking me about where my mother was and who she was with are suddenly turned into statements of accusation against my mother, which would result in a beating. And I was always feeling very guilty as a child about whether I was the trigger for the violence that was ultimately visited upon my mother's body. And so for children in those situations, it is incredibly hard. And thankfully, as I write, my father's transformation came while we were still young. And he was able to change from being an abuser to someone who actually ended up loving my mother very much and showing that in the way he treated her.
You also share a funny story about growing up in Phoenix and your first experience of love and how you ended up being hurt in the process.
They say the first cut is the deepest. And in writing that, because you become so cynical about love as you get older, and I'm incredibly cynical about love as I've become older. Hopeful, but cynical. And writing that piece about the blunt force trauma of love, when your heart first beats for someone in a way that is other than about biological function. It is such a profound place to be in. And I think that, obviously in hindsight, I'd probably say it was infatuation, but I thought I really did love him at the time. And he wounded me and he left me, you know, or, you know, the way our story evolved was that we could never be together. And it was so sweet and so innocent, and yet so futile.
I remember you even attended his wedding.
I went to his wedding and I wore like what I thought was the best outfit ever. I tried to show off all my assets on that day. And I was all of, probably 19 or something, like, still quite young and immature. And I put on this brave face. And as I write, you know, if I could have broken every champagne glass and kind of writhed in the shards, I would have bled to death in his face. But don't we all wear that face? You know, when we're faced with the person who spurned us and who didn't love us back. We never want to show them how much we hurt. We want to be absolutely strong. We'll cry on the inside, but damn it, we'll never show them how we feel.
Tell us how working as a journalist was different from when you were working in Iran as compared to South Africa.
The way I started working as a journalist in Iran was quite interesting because I started out at the religious school at the university in Qom. I wanted to be a religious student, or I was a religious student for a while, and then as kind of disillusionment began to set in about certain things that I do mention in my book, I was offered an opportunity to be involved in a current affairs show, to actually host an English medium current affairs show in Tehran. I had really great contacts and a really great network while I was in Iran. So the path was really easy for me to follow. We went to live in Tehran and I worked for the public broadcaster there. And it was a really interesting life. To work as a journalist in current affairs, to see a side of Iranian life that you wouldn't ordinarily interface with when you're outside of the country. I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding about Iranians in general, the kind of lives that they lead, the kind of history that they have had, and their resilience and generosity as a people.
The book also tells us about the funny family times you used to share with your family while you were at the beach and how it brought you fond memories of you and your father.
The beach it's like an altar to me. It's a sacred place. It's a place that I do remember my father. He's the one that, you know, would swim out in front, away from everybody else. And he never made me feel afraid of my abilities. So he would always urge me to come with him. And in the beginning, you know, he would help me in the water and make sure that I wasn't drowning. Because we never had, you know, we couldn't afford lessons for swimming. So I would kind of copy the kids at the Asherville pool and see how they were swimming. Oh, kick your leg, do this or whatever. So I learned how to swim in that way. When we were in the ocean, my dad would always have me up front with him. And it was just the two of us, no one else in the family really. My brother would be somewhere around, but it was him and I. And I always knew that even facing the most dangerous of waves or the endless depths of the ocean, that as long as my father was by my side, everything was going to be okay. So in his passing, the sea has been that cord that connects him and I. I recall some of my fondest memories with my father swimming. And so those trips to the beach were beautiful when we were kids. He taught me to love the medium. To this day, Sunny, I'm the last person to get out of the water. I was swimming, we run down to Durban for a quick trip or whatever, rain or shine, I'm in the water. And my kids have also developed a love for the water, and I hope that they remember me in that way one day when I'm gone.
You also dedicate a chapter to your mother. Tell us why she is so special to you.
Our mothers, across all of our communities, especially in poorer communities, they're the true heroines. They find a way to keep bread on the table. They find a way to create order. They find a way to manifest love, even when they haven't been the recipients of those gifts, when they do it under very difficult circumstances. And my mother is one of those women. And I have a lot of scar tissue in my life. As much as I'm an open person, there's a lot that I don't share with people. And it's because of the scarring and the scar tissue. My mother, through all of her many emotional and physical scars, has not put up the same barrier. There is no wall with her. She loves freely and she gives freely. And those are lessons that I can learn from, and thankfully she's still alive and I can continue to learn. And in fact, many women across our communities teach us that every day. When they get up from a bedside after a night's beating, they do it for their children. When they go to work on the factory floor, when it's cold and when it's early in the morning, they do it because of their children. And you find over and over, they put off their own happiness and their own prospects of love in the name of their children. They are the true heroines in our society.
And lastly, what are you hoping the readers will take from reading your book?
First of all, I just want to thank anyone who invests in my writing journey, because it really is an investment. I'm hoping that, like you said about your experience in reading it, that you laughed a lot, that there was a great deal of humor, that you were provoked into thinking and being reflective. But most of all, for anyone who has done me the honor of buying my book, is perhaps to find clues for encouragement. That you can carry on, no matter what your circumstance is, and that the story of your life remains to be written and completed.
That was journalist and author Iman Rappetti speaking to Polity about her book titled Becoming Iman.